All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here on Talking in Technicolor, the very finest and public access psychedelic television. I am here today with my friend Drew Houchin. He is coming on board as new co-host down below. Hey, Drew.
Hey, how's it going, everybody?
And
Yeah, it's good to be on, man.
yeah, I am very glad to have you. Drew comes with just a lot of knowledge and connections in the local community. And anytime we've talked, I've always been impressed with his knowledge about chemistry and just all the level of reading that he's done related to this field. So I think he's going to be a real asset to the show. Thanks, Drew.
Oh, yeah, thanks, man.
And
Excited.
Shane LeMaster is here with us as well. I'd like to welcome him. Hi, Shane.
Hey guys, good
Thank
to
you
be
so
here.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here, man. So as I have Facebook stalked you a little bit, and as we've talked in person as well, Shane and I are both part of the Psychedelic Club at CSU. We've spoken a few times. He's done a microdosing lecture for us, as well as come and participated in Integration Circle before. And he's also involved with some of the Psilocybin Oversight work on the community level happening up in Denver, if I'm not mistaken. Is that right, Shane?
Yeah, that's right. That's the Denver Psilocybin Mushroom Policy Review Panel, and I know that's a long-winded name, but I wasn't part of the naming. I'm just a part of the panel now, one of 11 appointed members of Colorado communities meant to represent the people.
That's awesome. So how's that been going so far?
Oh, it's been going great. We've had I don't know, 3 or 4 meetings. We were meeting monthly. Now we're meeting every 6 weeks. And initially, our only objective, or what we were slotted to do, and this is this panel comes into effect as a part of Initiative 301, the decriminalization of mushrooms in Denver, and as part of that decriminalization, this panel was to be formed. And really, the only task we were set to do was to come up with data and put together a report for city council, for the mayor, for whoever's interested down in Denver, to show them the effects that the decriminalized movement has had in the past year since the initiative was passed. And really, they're primarily been focused on reporting, just reporting statistics. So, how many people have been caught by the police using, how many people, where are people using, this type of information. And so far, I mean, we've already nailed down most of that initial objective. So we're already starting to branch out into new, more exciting realms for us anyway, as far as, bringing research to Denver, psilocybin research possibly. Myself and Sarah Gale from the Zendo project, part of MAPS, are putting together a harm reduction training.
That's awesome.
For the first responders, police, hospital workers, anybody who could come into contact with folks who are under the influence of psilocybin mushrooms. Both Sarah and I have extensive experience in therapeutic crisis intervention, especially with people in altered states. So we're really branching out and starting to do a lot of things that we are excited to do, and hopefully going to change some more policy here in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. I know things have certainly been changing lately. In fact, I think Drew had a little piece of news that he was hoping to share with us this evening that came out yesterday. Is that right?
Yeah, actually, maybe you can chime in on it, Shane. Possibly, I saw a new article that came out that MAPS had released, and I guess some of the results have come back from the third and final trial, some of the first runs, and they said they're blown away by the results and possibly commercialization very soon, is what I read in the article in particular. Yeah.
Of MDMA or psilocybin?
Yeah, of MDMA. I'm sorry. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and we have a great phase 3 site for MAPS MDMA trials right here in Fort Collins.
Really?
Out at the Wholeness Center, Dr. Scott Shannon runs that, as well as some other colleagues of mine. But yeah, that's a phase 3 site, and they're coming out with great results in human subjects. You mentioned a buzzword that I've been seeing flying around psychedelic memes and things these days, which is commercialization.
Right? I know they use that in particular. They sure did.
Yeah, and I think the term itself brings with it a ton of controversy and debates on both sides. You know, people in the psychedelic realms. I know people who are definitely for it because they want to see mass proliferation of these medicines and legalization of freedom over consciousness and all these things. And on the other side, a lot of people saying, we don't want that commercial model. Psychedelics are the antithesis of commercialization and capitalization or capitalism, and it really should be a medicine for the people. People shouldn't be making money off of nature. So I see both sides of the argument, and that's a really interesting word that they choose to use.
Yeah, it really is going to be a fine line. I agree with you, as far as how far do we take it with that, for people to be credentialed who are providing the medicine and, safe setting and to provide, the wages for everyone who's going to be working at these centers, hopefully centers in America one day. But
and part of it for me too, like I understand the, I guess the apprehension at the idea of things becoming overly commercialized. But I think part of it has to do as well with access, I think for me, as long as people are allowed access in a safe environment and they have people who can help watch over them, or at least, some sort of structure to where they can act responsibly, I kind of feel like the people doing that kind of work, and I do feel like it's very important work, should be paid. So I have no problem with, say, someone who has the chutzpah to open up a psilocybin therapy practice when it's legal on the state level, say before it becomes legal on the federal, or even just being new to the field. If they have the capital to put forward that effort and decide to do this with good intentions, I see no reason someone can't make a living off of that. As long as, and this is a big caveat for me, as long as it doesn't interfere with people having the right to cultivate it privately at their own home. Because I'd say it'd be one thing if there's access for everybody, but you should also be able to opt out if you want to be more self-sufficient. So
yeah, I agree, and I think all good points. And one of my future visions for psychedelics, and I'm trained in psychedelic assisted therapies too, and one of my hopes is that we can open retreat centers, and I can make a living off of providing this much needed medicine for people. So some level of commercialization, I think, is good if we do it the right way. I think the thing that we're trying to avoid the most is what we've seen with most other pharmaceutical drugs is that big pharma gets its hands on it and then monopolizes the access and then charges exorbitant amounts way above what it costs to even make the medicine and reduces access for people. So I think that's the level of commercialization that we're not hoping for.
Yeah, same.
More on a grassroots level.
Well, certainly, like, it seems like, with the medical model coming out, they're making some of these compounds that metabolize into psilocin at this point. I know Drew knows the name of the one I'm thinking of. It's slipping me right now. What is it?
Or ACO DMT.
That's the one. I always get some letter or number incorrect. But, it would be nice if whatever legislation did eventually come forward to open things up a little bit, did not prevent people from having just raw, dried mushrooms, not requiring you to get a prescription and go to a doctor who's probably most mainstream doctors still kind of iffy on this anyway, probably for several years after people start using it,
I agree.
Yep. Yeah, if I'm not mistaken, the patent for MDMA, it came up a few years ago, if I'm not mistaken, and I think it's still just floating around out there because the pharmaceutical companies don't want it in particular. And and if if I remember correctly, I think MAPS is going to be getting, if and when MDMA becomes legal for psychotherapeutical use, they will be getting the profits from anything that happens with this because they were the ones who owned the patent at first, and now it's just kind of floating out there. I believe that's going to be the case, if I'm not mistaken. So.
Well, of course, nobody wants to touch it if it could actually help fix people, right?
Mm-hmm. And make billions off of that. Yeah. Right. That's the beauty about a lot of these medicines. If we can educate people and educate the public, people are fully capable of cultivating and growing a lot of these plant medicines at their house, and that's the beauty of it.
Yeah, I think that's what happened with ketamine as well. Is that the patent ran out, and now it's widely available off-label for a number of different treatments. Think could happen.
Yeah, it's exciting. I'm actually myself involved in ketamine-assisted psychotherapy, and it's been wonders. It's been incredible. So.
Yeah. So, and on that note, I know Shane, from what I've heard, you're involved in a local. Is it a psychedelic training program for therapy providers? Is that accurate?
Yeah, so I'm part of a group called the Psychedelic Research and Training Institute here in Fort Collins. It was formed last year, also at the Wholeness Center. A conglomerate of us professionals got together and saw a need. We started this professional group up, and we're focused on two things: research and training. So we do research on a number of different compounds. We're looking into doing research with ketamine and CBDs and psilocybin when it becomes available and things like that. And then we're also doing training too. So we're training therapists who are licensed clinicians in the mental health field, or psychiatrists or hospice workers, folks who see use and benefit for these ketamine assisted treatments and for future other psychedelic assisted treatments. And we're providing a training slotted under ketamine assisted psychotherapy because it is legal. But the training methodology that's used is, it's transferable to any, or to most other substances, I would say, most other psychedelic therapy substances.
Sure. And
we're also providing training for professionals who will eventually want to start up businesses, like we're talking about, retreat centers for psychedelic assisted therapy. So we're providing business trainings on how do you navigate the business landscape with these substances, and really have good business practices, ethical business practices around them that benefit the community.
Well, you'll definitely be a resource to know in the coming years, for sure, with this program. I'll tell you, my wife is a nurse practitioner, and she's getting ready to go back for her psych nurse practitioner. And I've been applying for masters in counseling. So our goal eventually is to start a joint practice where she would handle the prescription side of things and I would handle the integration therapy side of things. And I just feel like, at least in my life, the personal work I've done, sort of self-guided, has been so impactful. I just feel like a calling to spread that to the community.
Yeah, that's kind of that model that you're mentioning with your partner is sort of the model that we're working on right now. I'm part of another group, private practice, that does ketamine assisted therapy here in town. And we work very closely with a couple psychiatrists, and that's exactly how it works. They do the medical screenings, they provide the medicine in the office, take blood pressure, and then it's me, the therapist, sitting there with the patient while they go through the experience, and after the experience, the medical practitioner will come back in at the end, do their final medical checkup, make sure that they're okay to go home, and then that's all that happens. And then the patient comes back for follow-up integration with myself. So yeah, that tag team with medical professionals is it's a really effective and really good model.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to only make sense, and especially like, the way that Sarah brings it to me, and our kind of ideas, as nurse practitioners, have a more holistic view of things a lot of times than medical doctors, because they've worked in nursing for so many years before they are eligible to be a nurse practitioner. And so they end up seeing more of the whole patient. And it really seems like at least what could be important in the psychedelic field is more of a holistic model where, whether it's psilocybin or MDMA or, what have you, ayahuasca, that, contemplative practice and lifestyle changes are just as important, and the psychedelic is just one tool in the tool belt, so to speak. Has that been your experience?
Yeah, absolutely. When I was younger, I used to think that psychedelics were the answer to everything. And then I quickly found out that they're not.
No.
That it's the action that you take based off of the insight gained that is the answer to everything, right? The answer.
Exactly.
And so yeah, I found the same, that, psychedelics weren't the answer for everything, and you can't be in that state all the time, every day.
No.
It's unhealthy, and it's really hard to do that anyway. And so, finding other practices, yoga and meditation, and for me, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, like that's where I find my flow states. That's where I find my spirituality. That's where I find my ego deaths and myself. I face myself every single day, hundreds of times on that mat. You got to find other ways to engage that. The psychedelic is just a catalyst. It kind of just gives you a glimpse into what's possible, and then leaves it up to you to do something about it. But really trying to integrate that kind of mindset into everything that I do, it makes this life the biggest trip in and of itself, without drugs. It's crazy.
Yep.
Well, I think maybe sometimes psychedelics can help us disengage from the monotony to see that this is the biggest trip. I've had a few people ask me, what is your, most powerful psychedelic experience you've had? And I'm like, easy, raising kids. You come face to face, like you said, face to face with yourself, but it's a tiny version of yourself with no inhibitions. And you see, oh, that behavior pisses me off. That's because that's me. You're seeing a reflection of yourself. But
can't wait for that trip.
Yeah, right. I was gonna ask. So no kids at this point, huh?
No. Well, I'm working on my PhD right now for another 3 years. My wife is finishing her master's in a year. When she finishes her master's, she's already given me the heads up. She said, this time next year, we're gonna start making babies. So get ready. So yeah, I'm kind of already starting to prepare myself for that journey.
That's wonderful.
Cool.
One thing that's really interesting to me, and Drew or anyone else who I've talked to for more than 5 minutes, like here, I'm really interested in the intersection between psychedelia and fatherhood, and the idea of healing intergenerational trauma. We talk a lot about in our culture right now about we're working on fixing this idea of toxic masculinity as males, and one thing that we don't, I feel like, talk enough about is how do we create a culture of positive masculinity? What does that mean? And what insights from the psychedelic realm can we bring to the table to help address that issue? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, you guys should check out this great podcast done by my friend Jonathan called Psychedelic Parenting.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
And,
what's the channel name?
Psychedelic Parenting.
Oh, straight up. Okay.
No, that's the name of the podcast. And he talks a lot about this. And this has been a topic on my own podcast, too, that I brought up. So a little plug there for my podcast.
Yeah, and what is the name of your podcast before we move on? Because I have been meaning to bring that up.
Yeah, it's called Conversations with the Mind. And you can find it for free anywhere the podcasts are. It's also on YouTube. But yeah, we talked about this idea of psychedelic informed parenting is sort of what I like to term it as. And we know as psychonauts, as journeyers into consciousness, that we learn a lot about ourselves and about these intergenerational traumas and the things that like our parents passed down to us and how we don't want to pass those on to our own kids. And so how do we, having gone to these places, these spaces, how how do we take that psychedelic information and help to inform our parenting in a way that is more holistic, that is more appreciative of, of young ones,
Mm-hmm.
and what they can teach us. But, how do we use that insight to be better parents? I think that's a fascinating topic of discussion for sure.
Yeah, I'll tell you, and I don't often discuss my ayahuasca experience, but I'll just say that the most powerful aspect of it for me was it was entirely themed around intergenerational trauma. It took me back to the level of my great grandfather who I'd never met, and showed me how he abandoned my grandfather, and then so he didn't know how to be a father, and then he raised my father, who then didn't have a father who knew how to be a father, and thus didn't know how to be a father too. And this insecurity rolled down the generations to me, and I've taken it upon myself to kind of stop that. Sort of like the buck stops here, and there's a big part, at least in it seems like Peruvian spirituality has a lot to do with this idea that when you're healing personal traumas, you're not just healing yourself, but you're in a way healing your ancestors too,
and future generations.
Absolutely. I mean, because you're the ancestor too, right?
Yep. I'm actually going through this myself my whole life. That was a big part of my experiences over the last few years, was healing generational traumas. I'm in the same boat with you, watching my dad and his father, and then his father just, shit rolls downhill. It started, many generations ago, and here I am, and I'm feel like I'm going to get to put a stop to it. And whenever I do have children, break those chains and move forward with this in my family. And so.
And I think a lot of people hearing what we're talking about as parents out there, some of them are probably freaking out like, oh my God, that's a lot of work for me to take on,
Right.
It is.
And I think it was really scary for me to have to realize that too. Like, there's a part of me that was angry at my parents and the people before me, how dare you guys leave all your trash on my doorstep for me to pick up, and now I got to do all this.
Yeah.
And that's a huge lesson I've taken from my psychedelic experiences, is that, like you said, the buck stops here. And it's truly, it's going to be scary. It's going to be hard. It's going to be dark night of the soul type stuff that I'm going to go through in order to do this. But it's going to be an honor to be able to do this for my kids and to do this for their kids, to really stop that with me. I'm willing to take all that pain and anguish just so that they don't have to feel that,
Yeah. I mean, wholeheartedly, I will say, just being in that process, in that practice currently, having basically almost a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old now, it was really important to me before we had the second one, because I had the wherewithal to understand where I was kind of already going wrong in my parenting, to make a big switch. And I just felt the calling to take San Pedro. And for me, that was something that just opened up my heart so much and made me realize that these little people, besides just being broken off parts of yourself, they're also part of all of us. You're part of them. And it just brought so much empathy for, you got to realize, they can be panicking or freaking out, over whatever it is, not having the right napkin, when you're 2 years old, wanting the blue napkin instead. To them, that's a really, really big deal. They've only been here, X amount of time. And, I'll tell you at, 31 over here, I haven't fully learned to deal with my emotions, so to expect that out of a little person as well is a hard thing to do. You know what I mean?
Well, these days it's hard to expect it from even adults. We saw how crazy people went over toilet paper when this whole coronavirus thing went through, and then you see people's scared inner childs coming out all over the place. It's like, man, this world needs some serious work.
A lot of traumatized people walking around out there right now.
And I would say a lot of people being traumatized as well, you know. It seems like, at least in my world, I lost about 3 weeks in the beginning of this thing, just for about a full week. I was presumed positive, and I lost probably 3 straight days, about 25 hours across the span of that time. Maybe not 3 days almost, but basically, yeah, I remember very little, just fever dreams, sick as I've ever been in my life. My wife was working with the first positive case in Larimer County out at her nursing home. And then she brought it straight home to me because this little old lady coughed in her face with COVID. And she's, you know, a nurse, a former sailor. She was in the Navy, so she has a really good immune system. But I'm like super sickly, so I was in bed. And I gotta tell you, you know, it's scary. Like, especially if you've come down with it. Like, you know, I know a lot of people who are like getting the sniffle right now, being like, "Oh God, is this the big one?" And it's like, no, it's seasonal allergies, you know. But there certainly seems like, for however legitimate fear there is, there's also just a lot of anxiety in the air. Are you guys feeling it too?
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, everything's supercharged right now. It's nobody, you know, it's kind of this thing. Nobody's in control of anything right now, and so it gives everybody that anxiety of not being in control of their own lives. I know I've definitely felt it, and kind of had to, you know, watch it happen, and so I could deal with it at least. But
Well,
getting weird.
and one question I had, and I think, yeah, I think supercharged. It absolutely is, Drew. But Shane, I was curious, for you as a counselor, as a therapist, in that field, what can you tell some of our listeners right now about coping skills during this time? What do you recommend people do? I know I myself have been a roller coaster of emotions. What would you recommend?
That's a big question. Everybody's different, but in general, do whatever works if it's healthy. You know,
Solid.
and there's a couple things. I mean, there's a couple things that I'm seeing. You know, I still run a private practice, and I'm not going to break anybody's confidentiality by saying that a lot of my clients recently, since this thing, have come to me just, you know, with, like you said, existential anxiety, unsure of what's going to happen next. And I get the sense that everybody's kind of feeling this now. And I think the biggest mental health concerns going on right now are depression and adjustment disorders, because we have to adjust to this new reality, right? And part of that is letting go of what you didn't necessarily want to let go of before. You know, it's very challenging. People are going through grieving processes of their old life, their old lifestyles. You know I went through grieving, not being able to go to campus. You know, I'm a student, and so having to grieve even small things like that, not being able to go to jujitsu. You know, I had to grieve that for 2 months. It was terrible. And so there's a lot of adjustment things going on right now. And as far as coping goes, you know, everybody's different. And so I suggest, you know, everybody has some that work and some that don't, and go for the ones that do. Explore new hobbies, explore your creative side, take advantage of this quarantine to rediscover yourself. A lot of people I know have been getting deep into all sorts of artwork, from music to painting. I've been getting into gardening, getting my hands dirty. Exercise is great. I know that motivation is low right now for things like that, but that's always a good one. Meditation, you know, we're talking about how, you know, the society feels like it's out of control, or no one's in control of anything these days, but we can maintain control within our own, like, 6-foot sphere, right? You can extend your arms out, and that's the end of your sphere. You can control what happens in that sphere. And so you shouldn't be waiting for someone else to tell you what you should do.
Surely.
You know, go out and take advantage of this time.
That's great. I think that's really good advice. Personally, I'll say, and I know Drew has been as well, I've been gardening a ton.
Yeah, me too.
You know, we put in, and I'll put in like a little slideshow right here with some pictures. I've been growing some mapacho, so the sacred Nicotiana rustica tobacco, as well as some Spanish heirloom tobacco, chamomile, lemon balm. So just a few, those are just some highlights, but obviously all your standards, tomato, squash, et cetera, et cetera. But pertinent to this channel, those are my psychoactives I'm growing right now just for the garden. And the fun thing about the rustica, really practical application, if anyone out there is listening, who's just getting into gardening and wants to do everything organic but might have a pest problem, you can use Nicotiana rustica if you boil it as a tea and strain the leaves out, let it cool and put it in a spray bottle. It'll be just like the tobacco episode on The Simpsons. You can spray some tobacco water all over your baby plants. Now, obviously, you don't want to do that on salad unless you want to feel like you're having a little bit of cha when you're eating your arugula. But yeah, that's what we use it for a lot, and we're planning on making perhaps some snuffs and some little cigarillos this summer with some Spanish heirloom tobacco as well. So it's been pretty fun. What have you been growing, Shane?
Oh, all kinds of stuff, mostly vegetables. Vegetables and flowers, man. It's going great. Working on the yard too. The grass is looking really nice.
Nice.
First time in years that I've been able to have the time to tend to a lawn. I always hated yard work when I was young, and we emphasis on work. And now my wife and I, we're re-terming it yard fun. So we go out, we're going to go have some yard fun. And it really is. It's really enjoyable to be mindful and take my time and really make the lawn like perfect, It's really nice. But before we get too far away from the coping skills piece,
yes.
I just wanted to mention, because I did say, do what works, but if it's healthy. And that's another thing that I'm seeing across mental health nationwide, worldwide probably too, is an uptick in substance abuse as a way of coping. We're seeing, suicide rates go up. We're seeing child abuse and domestic violence go up. So obviously those are coping mechanisms too, but very unhealthy for yourself and for others around you. So I just want to emphasize that people are utilizing whatever they can get their hands on. And that's why here in Colorado, they tried to enact like a prohibition again on cannabis and alcohol during the quarantine, saying it was non-essential. And, the citizenry stood up like really fast. And,
as well they should.
Yeah. And and then what the governor said, alcohol is essential medicine, and so is cannabis. And I can definitely see cannabis, but for people who are self-medicating with alcohol, can you imagine if they closed down all the liquor stores and bars? People would be dying left and right from withdrawal. It's a serious medical condition. And so...
Yeah. I knew an old man once who was an alcoholic, and he stopped drinking because he had gotten abusive basically to his granddaughter and committed to stop. So he quit cold turkey, fucking died. That week his heart stopped because whatever it is, if you're used to drinking that much every day, you absolutely can die from stopping drinking, as with, many other kinds of withdrawals.
Withdrawals from benzos and alcohol can kill you, most definitely. I have a pretty close friend. In the last few months, he was really heavy alcoholic, and he tried to cut back, and him just cutting back, he ceased out at work, and it was serious, and it was ugly, and it's unfortunate, but yeah, that's unfortunately we can't close things like that down, because we would see, like you said, people going to the hospital left and right, because it's a serious public issue right now.
Well, yeah, I think there's a lot of functional alcoholics in our society that really just fly under the radar. You realize, okay, it's really fun to have a mimosa at brunch. I do that. But there's a lot of people who, do that, or like a Bloody Mary every morning, just like people who wake and bake, experiencing an altered state at all times. And genuinely, if it's helping some people not go crazy while they're stuck inside right now, you know, I think to some extent, as long as they're not, you know, harming themselves or other with it, you know. Certainly we've gotten a few bottles of wine here and there to enjoy with dinner, probably a little bit more than usual, but not a crazy amount, you know.
Yeah, it really goes back to freedom over consciousness, right? As long as you're not harming anyone else in the process, which is tough to see when you're in it, you know. I was an alcoholic for a number of years in my late teens, early 20s, and I thought I was just doing it to myself, right? But I come out of it now, and I'm almost 11 years sober now, and I look back and I'm like, holy cow, like I destroyed so many relationships, so many things in my life, so many other people are still traumatized by my actions back then. Like, you know, as long as you're not harming anyone else, and I say that because, like, as an addiction professional as well, I've had clients who are functional heroin addicts. You know, they're Fortune 500 CEOs or they're owners of very lucrative businesses, but they shoot a little heroin every single day, just to feel normal. And if they don't have it, they go through the withdrawals. But other than that, they're great family people, you know, very successful, or what we would call successful in our society. But they have this habit, you know, and yeah, I think, you know, just how we demonize drug use here in the United States and in the world in general, not every country, but we demonize it to a point where, you know, people can't even talk about it.
Yeah, I would go as far as to say even within our own little psychedelic bubble here, our little community, there's quite a bit of, you know, drug hierarchy and drug elitism that I see, you know, particularly around, you know, weirdly enough, a lot of us in the psychedelic community use it, myself included, for mental health improvement. And, you know, psilocybin for me was the breakthrough for not having constant death fear, to where every literally 2 or 3 minutes I would be like having a mini panic attack. It was debilitating, right? But, you know, miraculous as that was, a lot of people, as soon as you say, but I also take a low dose of citalopram, which I do, they're like, ooh, SSRIs, I gotta stay away from that. And honestly, for me, like a very low dose of citalopram plus microdosing, I feel fucking wonderful. You know, I'm exercising, I'm productive, and I'm not in my bed, not bathing and crying every day. Things are good, you know? So I find it interesting that a lot of times we have this tendency to take whatever we're doing and saying, this is what it should be. Any other drug besides the one I'm really into isn't okay, you know?
Yeah, I agree. You know, like you're saying, it's been very demonized. Narcotics have in our society, and when I look around, I see that most everyone has an addiction in some way, shape, or form, whether it be, you know, actual drugs or food, sex, working out. Even, I mean, I see it every day. I mean, just because everybody's poison is different and some aren't illegal and others are, doesn't mean it's not unhealthy mentally, physically. You know, it's different coping mechanisms for different people, I guess. But
yeah, I have a good friend who graduated from Europa, and he published a paper a couple of years ago called The Sanity of Addiction, talking about that very thing and taking a Buddhist-oriented perspective, saying that, you know, everybody has these vices and no one is qualitatively better than the other. It's just what works for that person, and that actually addiction isn't some disease that you get, like we say in the medical model here, that addiction is just a normal coping reaction, and that everybody reacts in that way. It's just that we specify which ones are okay and which ones are not okay to have an addiction to. But yeah, in his article, he said addiction is perfectly natural and perfectly normal, and we should start treating it just like that and stop demonizing it.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think it goes back to, as well, for me, this idea of normalizing mental health conditions. That's one thing Drew and I have related to about, you know, he's very open about his use of therapy and working on his mental health. And I'm very open and communicative about that as well. And, my mental health practices and, problems. I very openly state that I'm depressed, or I am clinically depressed, diagnosed, currently not feeling so depressed. But I think being able to talk about this kind of thing and not feel shame to say, hey, I'm going to therapy. If you broke your ankle and you had to go to the doctor for that, you wouldn't be like, oh, I just have an appointment. I don't want to talk about it. You wouldn't be ashamed of having broken your ankle unless it was doing something really stupid, But, we kind of ironically clam up at the idea that we're talking to someone,
No, I agree. It's been really important for me to actually kind of share with all my close circle that I am in therapy. And in particular, I'm doing psychedelic integration psychotherapy and also ketamine assisted psychotherapy. At first, I was kind of felt, shameful for doing therapy, but after these crazy experiences with ayahuasca and 5-MeO and trying to pick the pieces up and do it in a correct manner, I need help. I need a lot of help doing it. I can't fix myself, and especially, in this field with psychedelics and whatnot. But not only have it's been really well accepted in my circle. I actually have another very close friend who has actually started going to therapy since then, and I've known a couple friend of one of my girlfriends. They've actually done some marriage counseling since then as well. So it's opened up some doors for some people that's close in my life that might not have had the opportunity to do it or felt too shameful to maybe go about finding someone to sit with. So it's been pretty beneficial sharing my experiences with it.
That's really great to hear. It's like you're leading by example. You're not out there like preaching therapy to people, but people see a change in you and they're like, I want some of what he has.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And for me too, I think, I have significant trauma and, alcoholism throughout my family and myself included. And I talk openly about that because, at first it was so difficult to be able to speak about it because I was afraid of the shame. But then I realized that what I was doing before, the life I was living before, that was so much more shameful for me anyway. Just living with that within myself. Holding on to that shame from the past was so much more painful than any kind of shame I could feel from actually seeking and getting help for my issue, and so I just want to, let the audience know out there too that, seeking help for a problem doesn't mean that you're weak. It means that it's a strength to be able to rely on others to support you and for you to be able to do the same for them too. We weren't born in this, in this place by ourselves. We're here with other people for a reason. And I don't know. I just want to plug that out there that the landscape is changing and people are coming around to getting more mental health help. But yeah, there's that shame piece that needs to be overcome.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to say too, I think it's fantastic that you're so brave coming out and talking about openly these kinds of things like alcoholism. And, same with Drew on the previous episode that we shared. Fantastic that you're able to talk about your time in prison with addiction and all those personal things. I think that's one thing for me that when we talk about the idea of positive masculinity, healing, intergenerational trauma, all that kind of good stuff, I think that kind of openness is key to starting the conversation of where do we want to go, as a society. And also one point that Shane, you brought up on your episode that I recently watched with Dennis McKenna, this idea of developing a psychedelic culture, of what, in our society do we want it to play out like? How do we want it to be? So I was wondering if you could maybe enlighten us a little bit about how you feel about that. Like, what do you hope to see in terms of how we develop as a psychedelic culture?
Yeah. And I just want everyone to know that whenever I say is, I'm speaking from the shoulders of giants before me who have
Surely.
explored this and opened the door. But yeah, I just started reading a lot of things about cultural appropriation of ceremony and tradition in the psychedelic world, the underground worlds here in the United States. And I was really kind of disturbed by it. I'd taken part in a couple indigenous, I say indigenous because they were here in the US, but they were touted as indigenous ceremony. And they felt to me, I mean, not having been from those cultures, they felt like they had a sense of tradition behind them, a sense of respect and veneration for the culture. But some of them were still led by white people, and that didn't sit well with me either. And the more I thought about it, I started to think, and talk with some of my friends in this world too, and we started to see that we here in the U.S. we're built off this idea of like a melting pot, right? We're a melting pot of cultures and ethnicities and people, and we are.
Or the salad bowl too, I've heard as well.
But yeah, but we also create our own culture, right? Like you go to other places in the world and people know what American culture is like. We have entire styles built off of American culture. So as Americans, or we should start to think about developing our own culture around psychedelic use. And what does that look like? It looks different from Amazonian or Peruvian traditions. It looks different from Mexican traditions, from Spanish traditions, from Russian and shamanic traditions up there in Siberia. Ours is unique, just like everyone else's. And if we're gonna move forward and own this space, we need to take a look at ourselves and decide what is our culture around it, and stop stealing from other people's cultures in order to bring it into ours, but look at what can we use that's useful from other traditions. Obviously they have a lot of history behind them, right? We can learn from that, but don't steal it from them. We can, take for example here in our culture, right? We have recreational psychedelic culture, countercultures, subcultures. We have medicinal psychedelic cultures, right, with their own rituals. Drew, I'm sure you can speak to this too with ketamine-assisted therapy. There's a ritual that goes into the actual session, and ritual looks different in a Western context. So ritual can just mean, the doctor comes in with the syringe. He draws the ketamine into the syringe. You lay down with the eye mask and the music and the blanket, and then he injects you. That's all ritual. It's all a routine, and it happens the same way every time. And so that's a part of this Western culture too, around psychedelics, that maybe they don't have in the Amazon, right? So we need to define for ourselves, what do we want our culture to look like? Stop stealing from other people. But when we borrow, give respect and give due credit to where those sources came from. Because they're extremely important to recognize that we're not starting something new here. No, we're still borrowing largely from others.
Yeah, I always try to approach it. So a lot of my personal work has been with Andean and entheogens, most specifically San Pedro, and there's a few, and it's a really interesting one to examine. Having a background in cultural anthropology, that's what my undergrad was in. Looking at that and seeing how many syncretic traditions there are, even just within Peru. You have, for any of these different plant medicines they use down there, there's typically, a mestizo tradition, an indigenous tradition, and then as well this whole third party sort of, gringo crystals and chakras kind of version of things as well. And then a lot of times there's the sub tradition of African descendants as well. I think it's called candomblé they do down there. So just for one entheogen, there's 4 different major categories, and they might make it or prepare it or have a different ritual from one village to the next. So I think as long as humans have been around, there's always been a history of cultural exchange between different groups. But I do also see the wisdom in trying to find what works more particularly for your culture and your setting as well. So, for myself, I do put out a meseta, a table full of different totems that work well for me, that have spiritual resonance with me, like a little statuette my grandfather gave me, and some crystals or whatever, some incense that resonates with me as a way to honor that tradition, and try to engage with it, because I feel like these folks have been doing this for a really long time, and they've got a really good guidebook for us to try to follow. As long as you do it with veneration, honor, and respect, and not in like a way that's to extract resources or take it for yourself and say, this is my thing, I'm the shaman, like kind of stuff you see people taking on. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I fully agree. We do need to find our own, our own psychedelic way, so to say, here in this country. And I've thought a lot about this here in the last year, actually, and almost the way I kind of see it going through shamanic training. If we are in America going to see retreat centers, possibly, I think shamanic training would be to have an MD, PhD, to be able to, that's the training you're going through to be credentialed to serve these medicines. And at the same time, I think this person should be doing their own medicine work, of course. But I think that's kind of what I've been doing personally for my own ketamine therapy. Actually, been trying to come up with my own like little almost ritual that I'm trying to get myself prepared for these experiences, especially the deeper ones. I'm actually doing the compounded lozenges, so we've done an array of milligram dosages, but things for me, like just, they do dietas in the jungle. When I went to Peru and I spent a couple weeks doing dieta, and for me personally, I've noticed that whenever I do kind of fast from things that I personally like to consume, especially like lots of caffeine, meat, things like that, when I give up things and show reverence to the experience I'm about to have, I always get so much more out of it. Basically putting in reverence for what I'm about to do. It's very important. And whenever I've done that, I get the most out of the experience. And that's what I've been trying to do with my ketamine, is make my own little rituals so I can get the most out of these experiences and go deeper with, the principle that less can be more too. So.
Surely. Yeah, I would say for myself, certainly the ritual aspect of taking any entheogen is so important, and I think one thing that we've developed, at least in the States, and I know some folks in Europe pay attention to this as well, is the idea of, setting and dosage, all of these folks that have kind of come before us, like Timothy Leary, Terrence and Dennis McKenna, Albert Hoffman and Gordon Wasson, all the folks that come before us, our forebears. I think we have a certain tinge of culture developing around it already. And my hope is that as people get into this, we do start to come to some, maybe not fully unified, because I'm all about free speech and individuality, but some sort of group culture of awareness and safety around it. But at any rate, I think at this point we're about ready to take a little break here. When we come back, we're going to talk with Shane about his first or maybe most seminal psychedelic experience, and then hear a little bit more about what is coming down the pipeline on his end, future projects and things like that. So thank you guys for being with us, and we will be right back shortly. All right, guys, we are back. I just had to scrape something off the pod bay door here and get that all sealed up. We had a little bit of a pressure leak here in the cabin, so Any rate, we are back with Shane and Drew. And before we left for the break, we were talking about trying to hear a trip story or two from Shane, or at least telling us kind of what was the big one, or maybe the big one or two that got you to be so passionate about psychedelics and psychedelic therapy.
Thank you for asking that question. I love sharing stories with other people who have been to the void and back. So I would say I want to share two stories. One will be the first time I ever tried any drug, period. Before I tried tobacco or alcohol or anything. I was off at military school on the East Coast in high school, and we took a field trip to an amusement park. And these were like really important days, right? Because it was really structured during the day, military school, lots of physical training, things like that, very regimented. And we just got to blow off some steam at this amusement park. But we showed up and it was pouring rain. And we were just super bummed that they were going to close down the park, and that we just took this multiple hour bus ride to get there. And but the park left it open for us because we had like a couple hundred military school guys in these buses. So they left the park open, and we had the whole run of the park just to ourselves. Just a bunch of adolescent, teenage boys running around causing trouble. Hadn't seen the outside of the compound for months. And two of my sergeants at the time, they were in my classes, but they had rank above me, and they held out this gel tab to me, and they said, "Hey, we're gonna do this thing. Do you want to do it with us?" And I had been against drugs and alcohol up to that point because I had seen what it had done to my family, and I was just like, no, I'm going to stop this in its tracks and stayed away. But on that day, in that circumstance, peer pressure, whatever it was, I went ahead and took that gel tab of LSD, and we had the most fun anybody could have in an amusement park on that day. Just imagine no lines anywhere. You can get on any roller coaster as many times as you want. We must have played 100 games of laser tag.
Nice.
And it was phenomenal. And I can remember, the entire day being fun, the bus ride home, sitting in the back of the bus, giggling with these two friends of mine because nobody knew that we were on it. And then coming down together later that night, I snuck out of my room after lights out and went to their room, and we hung out for the rest of the night, laughing, and it was a blast. And after that experience, and seeing like this whole other side of consciousness that I had no idea existed, I hadn't even heard stories like what I had seen, and I was just fascinated. I was like, there's this whole other universe that we can't see. So from that point on, I was into consciousness more than anything else I had ever been before and ever since. So now my life is like devoted to consciousness. I became a mental health therapist, an addictions counselor, psychedelic therapies, all sorts of things, meditation. I mean, my podcast is all about consciousness. So everything in my life revolves around exploring this vast landscape of consciousness because of that seminal experience. The other experience I think I would share with you is one that I think had one of the most profound effects on my life. Not because, the experience itself was pretty powerful, but like we were saying before in the podcast, like the real magic comes from the action that you put into your life after you have the experiences. And it was because of this experience that I proposed to my wife. Something I never thought I'd ever do, get married. But so it was an ayahuasca experience. We were in a small group, 15 people in a circle. We had a shaman up from Brazil that was working with us that night. And a few things in particular stand out about that experience, and it was really around systems. So part of the experience, I was exploring parts of my body system as if I was like a cell in my body, kind of floating around, kind of seeing the workings of how things went. And I realized at that point that everything is this system internally and externally, and we're all just kind of working together. And if one part of the system stops operating, then the whole system goes into like this panic mode, right, inside your body. And so I got to see that sort of internal and external. Another part of the experience was going in asking the question, what do I do in this relationship with this woman that I'm deeply in love with? And I have this fear of, not really fear of marriage, but more fear of divorce, having seen my mom go through 3 divorces in my life. And I was like, fuck that. Like, I don't even want anything to do with any possibility of divorce. Therefore, best way to do that is never to get married. And but I was like, what do I do? Like, I love this woman so much. I want to spend the rest of my life with her. And I went in with that question. And grandmother ayahuasca showed me sort of like this splintering of 2 pathways, this fork in the road that I was standing at. And it showed me what my life would be like without her. It showed me that I would still achieve all my dreams and aspirations. I'd have a nice house up in the mountains that I could retire to like I want to, but that I would be miserable and lonely by myself. And then it showed me the other pathway, that if I went the marriage route with my wife, not only would I achieve all my dreams and aspirations and have all the things that I wanted tangibly, but I would be surrounded by love instead of being lonely. I would have her, and I saw all these little like kids and grandkids around me, and just like, I was at that moment, I was like, this is what I have to do. And the very next morning, I know they say don't make big decisions right after a psychedelic journey, but
they say that.
I was more sure of this than anything, and I have not regretted it one day. But the next morning, right home, I just dropped down on one knee and I said, will you marry me? And she lit up. So that was phenomenal.
And how long ago was that? How long have you guys been married?
We've been married almost 2 years.
Congratulations. That's the hardest part, is the first couple years, I feel like.
Yeah, and it's been a breeze for us. That's why I don't regret it. It's been nothing but pretty smooth sailing.
That's great.
I think the last little piece of that ayahuasca journey I wanted to share with you guys, and you guys might have experienced this too, is towards the end of the journey, I went outside, I ventured outside, and there's these beautiful trees around, and we get that sense that like the plant life is communicating with us in some way, whether through movement or through vibration, or we could see extra things off of the leaves or whatever, a little extra glimmer. And I put my hand on this huge tree trunk, giant tree, and immediately I was out of my own body, experiencing the inside of like the tree and what the tree was communicating and breathing. And again, back to systems, like it was this entire conglomeration of all these little tiny entities, each doing their job to make this tree live for however many hundreds of years it had been there. But it was a phenomenal thing, because it opened up my eyes to, the idea that there are so many more other consciousnesses out there, that there's not just human consciousness, that there's so many different forms, that plants have their own consciousness, pets, even the rocks that we kick down the street have some form of consciousness. And it just kind of gave me this realization that exists, and drew me further down the rabbit hole of consciousness. But sorry, I've been rambling for a while now.
No, that's exactly what my intent in asking you such questions is. I'd say for myself, certainly since my first mushroom trip, I spent a good part of it at night out in my garden in the summer, and I'd reach my hand out and my tomato plants, which the leaves would become like fractal and jagged and reach out and touch my hand. as well says like they were communicating with me. And I always, anytime I take mushrooms, I feel like I can communicate with plants in that state, and it just makes sense, and I don't even question it during that state. And then afterwards I'm like, I don't know, is that true? But I think it probably is. You know, like I wonder if sort of that interconnectedness that we see in that realm between us and others, whether it's seeing the filaments between people or a web, or feeling like you can communicate with nature, or just recognizing that you're part of a larger system, a macro organism, so to speak. I wonder how much of that is actual perception. Like, are you actually communicating with a plant, or are you actually seeing a real far off planet in your mind's eye when you have a visual, or is it just symbolic of some artifact happening in your neurochemistry? What do you think?
Well, they say that where was I going with this? I'm sorry, just drew a blank. Oh yeah, they say that only 10% of your body is actually even yours. That 90% is all these smaller organisms sort of come together into this super organism, and how we think of communication as mostly verbal, like that's just one form of communication that this consciousness has, right? If 90% of my body are these microorganisms and little dust mites and all these other living little bacteria, like they communicate too, and they communicate non-verbally. They communicate with other means too. So what's to say that parts of ourself are communicating actually with plants, with everything around us, but that we're not aware of that communication going on, because it's going on at such a small level. You know what I mean? Like a microscopic level.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even if you look at, recent studies involving what's happening out in the, in the forest or in our neighborhood or whatever, plants communicate with each other through, mycelium and through the microflora. One kind of tree can send a distress signal to another of its kind, and a tree of the same species through the mycelial network, the mushroom roots or fibers, as it were, for those who don't know about mushrooms, will send nutrients to the other tree that's suffering. So they have a sort of intelligence and connectivity, which it's hard. I think when we examine intelligence, we think about it as being similar to us, but structurally, when you look at mycelium, it is similar to us, in the sense that it creates a network similar to neurons, Yeah,
and I've read studies too about how those mycelial beds can communicate when danger is afoot too. If a bug or if a predator to the plant is like eating this plant, it can send off signals to neighboring plants. I've heard something, I don't know if I haven't read an actual study on this, but I've heard something about this where they can signal mammals too in some ways with some pheromone, so that if another mammal is sort of like, say a deer is like munching this bush or something to death, this bush can send out some pheromones to draw in a bigger predator to get rid of the deer. I've heard things like that too. Yeah, which is fascinating too, because there was a study that came out in the redwood forest a couple years ago, showing that the redwoods were putting out molecules into the air that only have synaptic connections within the human brain. So they don't have any other way to connect with any other animal that we know of. And so really? It seems like the redwoods are trying to communicate specifically with human beings for some reason using this chemical, but we don't know what it's for or what it's trying to communicate, which is really fascinating.
Maybe they're telling us to stop it.
Yes, we can create We could just learn to create a symbiotic relationship with this planet. I think we could watch it heal itself and watch us thrive at the same time. Like you were saying, like even the rock you're kicking down the road, it has its own consciousness. It's one thing 5-MeO actually just expanded in me. I dropped my entire life after that, moved out to Colorado to follow my dreams, but I'd never been out west before that, and seeing the mountains. And after this big peak experience on 5-MeO, I felt like I could, experience myself as the mountains, and it just like brought me to tears to experience myself as another, to see another form of consciousness that's a solid state, but has so much life to it at the same time. But
the mountain is a moving, living being.
Yes, it is
every single day, and yeah, it is a powerful force.
It's majestic.
It's like the ocean.
Yes, agreed.
And I'll say, I feel like one thing that the psychedelic experience has brought me is that I truly feel, in the grandest sense of things, that the earth itself is sort of an organism, and we're almost like little organelles floating around in it, and we don't even realize we're all part of the same thing. And, as we're poisoning the thing that keeps us alive, the greater organism.
That's the conundrum of the ego, right?
Yep.
We think we're separate from anything. We're not separate from anything.
Not even a little bit. And, I've found the moments where I start to feel real depressed in my life. A big part of that is this feeling of loneliness. And I think that's losing your connection from that greater supporting, structure and network that we're part of,
Honestly, that's what I think the answer to most mental health issues really is at its core. It's not, brain chemistry and stuff it can be a factor, but that's not the cause. It's this disconnection with others, disconnection with ourselves, most importantly, disconnection with the stars and the cosmos, right? Like you go outside in modern society and you look up at the stars, you see maybe 1/100th of what people saw a couple hundred years ago. We're so disconnected from anything beyond what we can reach out and touch, and if we just would take a break and like shut it all off, shut it all down for a couple minutes just to look at the stars, like I think we would be blown out of our socks. That's for sure.
I agree that some of the most beneficial times was going to these retreat centers, and it wasn't just the medicine work, but it was disconnecting from the Western society and not having phone service and just completely being in nature, disconnected from everything else, and letting my internal clock reset itself and go back to appreciating who and what we are in this reality, really. But
yeah, I do feel like it's something that we really do take for granted. I spent a whole year out in Portland, Oregon after college. I moved there because I was really into the idea of, going to the ocean, but also there hiking, beer, bicycling. And I realized most of the reasons I moved there were reasons Fort Collins is cool, but only after I left. But we didn't see, it was so cloudy that winter, we didn't see a star the whole time that we lived in Oregon. First of all, we were in Portland, a big city with lots of light pollution. And but yeah, the first thing I did when we got back is we went out to an abandoned missile silo. Not recommended. Don't do that. But it's out in the middle of nowhere. And when I came out, I'd forgotten how beautiful the Milky Way was. Like, I hadn't seen it for over a year, and I just got to my knees and started crying. It was such a sight for sore eyes after not seeing it for that long. And I totally agree. If you could just stop and look up and realize maybe someone out there is also looking up at you, you never know.
Yeah, I was looking at your backdrop with the pyramids, and that's what.
Oh yeah.
That's what it kind of reminded me of. It's like like back then, like light pollution was almost zero. at night. You know, they had so much more of a rich connection with themselves and the earth and the cosmos and the mystical and the spiritual. It's interesting. It's only since recently, I guess, with the modernization and electricity and all these things that we're really starting to lose out on a lot of those things that really connected us to what made us human. What are we becoming now then if we're moving away from being that original human?
That's a $1 million question right there.
Right. You know, will we eventually merge with technology and become beings of pure energy, or will we tear it all down and become cavemen again?
Exactly. I was about to do the same thing. We already have merged with technology.
Yeah. Well, they say that's a type 1 civilization. Technology is the internet, which that's pretty cool to think about. We're definitely not there with anything else.
Yeah. I'm really hoping that's why we can see the not only decriminalization, but hopefully legalization of, honestly, from my personal view, all drugs, so we can study this. I just lost my train of thought entirely. Where I was going with that, guys? Yeah,
that's okay. I'll cut that part out. Not cutting it out. Well, one other thing I wanted to ask you about, goodness, I guess just, it's a very rare opportunity for us to be able to talk with someone who's actively out in the field doing some therapy, both as, an addictions counselor dealing with that side of substance use, and also in the integration field and involved with those kind of services such as you are. So I guess as we kind of close up here, I'd like to ask you, Shane, what sort of tips and tricks, and I know not everything's universal, but what sort of tips and tricks do you have for people looking to either, start using psychedelics for the first time, or more importantly, mindfully using them for the first time and thinking about their planning and their integration through that process?
Good questions. First and foremost, I would say that fear and nervousness are normal. They should be a part of the experience, in my opinion. If there's no sense of fear or nervousness going into a psychedelic journey, then you're not really respecting what the medicine is about to show you. So that's okay, and that's totally normal. So accept that. And I'd say in a general sense, people who want to either start up or continue their psychedelic journey, the biggest piece of advice is to go in with a level of curiosity. So that really helps me anyway, like, especially with the fear and nervousness too. I want to be curious about the things that hold me back. I want to be curious about the things that scare me. I want to be able to face those challenges head on, because I know that that's the only way that they're truly going to go away, or that I'm going to be able to form new relationship or make peace with them. So I'd say for people, go in with courage, go in with curiosity, and know that fear and nervousness is part of the experience. It's going to be okay. Almost all of these drugs that we're talking about on here today, there's very low harm profiles for these drugs. I'm not saying they're harmless, but I'm saying the drug itself, in most cases, is not what's going to kill you. It's going to be some unsafe behavior or something like that. So go in with courage, go in with curiosity, make sure you're safe, doing it with safe people. And as far as integration goes, integration, in my opinion, is far more important than the experience itself. If you're just going to go into the experience for the experience, great. I mean, I've done a lot of recreational psychedelics too. But if you really want to use it as like a tool for, the most insane awesome changes you've ever seen in your life, then there's a way to do that. So do it safely, do it with intention, and do it with integration afterwards, so that someone who knows the territory, who isn't going to think you're crazy when you're talking to them about it, can help you put those pieces back together. Because the psychedelic experiences shatters your reality into an infinite amount of pieces, and you need help putting those back together in a way that serves you and your life better. So get help. There's people out there like myself that are trained in how to do that. And I would say that for people who aren't even experimenting with psychedelics, like, integration can be a part of everybody's life. I regularly integrate all sorts of experiences and I'm sure you do too, with your kids, right? You have these amazing, joyous experiences. Like, you got to sit back for 5-10 minutes and be like, holy cow, what was that? That was a new level of love that I've never felt before. I have to integrate this and reproduce this and explore it. We should be integrating more and more and more of our daily life experiences, but especially for these altered states, because it's such a rare little glimpse at, what's possible. If you really want to make the most of it, you gotta get some help to do that. That'd be my best advice.
That's great.
Yeah, that's great advice. Yeah.
I was gonna say, I think one key that you hit on there is one thing I'm always going on about, is the idea of getting someone to talk to who won't think you're insane.
Yeah.
Someone who's been there before, right?
Yeah.
And that's a big thing Drew brought up before. If you think about like psychiatrists and therapists these days, right? They can prescribe meds and they'll put you on antidepressants and antipsychotics. But if you ask them, would you be willing to put yourself on that? They'd be like, hell no, I will not put myself on that, right? So I think that's so important that, if you're going to be giving these mind-altering substances, whether it's legal prescriptions or psychedelic medicines or whatever, you have to know the territory. You have to know what it feels like. You have to know what are some of the things that these people are going to see. So if you're seeking out someone for integration, make sure that it's somebody who knows the territory, who's been there before, maybe who is referred to you by somebody who knows what they're talking about.
Yeah, I fully agree. I actually had I'm not going to say bad experience, but it was not what I needed for what I was looking for with the psychedelic integration. First off, being able to talk to someone like yourself about these experiences has probably been the most beneficial part of my integration over the last few years. But when I first started this, I was with someone else, and I don't think that they had too many experiences, although I was led to previously believe that they did. And after about 4 or 5 months of this, it wasn't doing necessarily more harm, but I was going absolutely nowhere with it. And I think it was because this person didn't really have any experiences. She was very well versed in all of this, but I don't think there was many personal experiences. Mm-hmm. And so just switching to someone who has had all these personal experiences themselves has been extremely beneficial to, like, for me personally, to just feel like I'm in a safe environment to open up and say whatever I need to say about any experience, no matter what it might be. So
yeah, absolutely. And I think one thing that's really important, at least, in my experience with therapy, has been trying to find a therapist that is able to meet you where you're at, because, a lot of times, they might have certain protocols that they stick to or what have you. And everyone, just like any other professional you go to, they have certain, tricks in their bag that they can use, and sometimes it's what you need and sometimes it's not, so it's good for you to have the self-examination that you need to be able to choose the right practitioner for yourself too, Drew.
Yep.
Certain. So I guess at this point, I'd like to just thank you, Shane, for coming in, or I guess calling in. No one's actually here except me. But basically, it's been a pleasure talking to you, and I'd like to real quick put a plug out for you as well. Again, was Conversations with the Mind. Is that correct?
That's right. That's my podcast. And then people can find me at my website, mindops.com. So it's mind-ops.com. That's my private practice. You can find all sorts of stuff about the things I do. If you guys wanted to check out the Psychedelic Research and Training Institute here in Fort Collins, you can go to the website at pratigroup.org. So it's PRATI group.org, just one word, Prati Group. Find out more about that. And we do live stream our psilocybin policy meetings. So if people are interested in being more active, being a part of that community, sometimes we even have sections open for public comment or question. Check out those live feeds. We meet every 6 weeks. You should see announcements all over Facebook. So check those out too.
Killer. And I'll make sure when I post this online to go down and put links for all those down in the description. So you guys should be able to look it up pretty easy. But yeah, thanks, Drew, for coming on as co-host as well tonight. And
yeah,
Shane,
I look forward to future endeavors. So. Absolutely. Yeah, I appreciate it, Shane. Thanks for coming on. It's been a good one. So.
Thanks, guys. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, have a great night.
Yeah, see you later, guys.